My parents fired me to save money. Now their business is crumbling, and I'm leading the competitor that's buying them out for pennies. I am Ethan Clarke. I'm 38 years old, and after 15 years of establishing my family's business from the ground up, my parents fired me because I was too pricey. Before I explain how their desperate, panicked calls resulted in the most amazing corporate takeover you've ever heard of, please let me know where you are watching from in the comments section below. It's always exciting to see how far these stories spread. It happened on Tuesday. I recall the air in the conference room being stale and dense, with an unspoken tension that made the back of your neck tingle. My father, James, sat at the head of the big mahogany table, his expression one of business indifference. I knew it was a terrible indication. My mother, Linda, sat to his right, her gaze fixed on a minor imperfection on the table surface to avoid looking at me. My younger brother John, across from me, wore a proud and vicious look. He wasn't even attempting to hide it. Clarke Properties was my entire universe for the previous 15 years. I had personally designed the whole digital infrastructure, from the tenant application portals across our 50 complexes in 3 states to the complicated maintenance request system and the secure payment processing network that processed millions of dollars per month. Everything originated from my head and fingertips. I designed it to be the silent, dependable foundation of our family's success. My father cleared his throat, making a dry, rasping sound. "Ethan," he said, his voice tinged with a frigid formality that he seldom used with me, even in joking. "We've been reviewing the company's finances with a consulting firm." He moved a glossy, spiral-bound binder across the polished table. The cover reads, "Operational Efficiency Analysis." I did not open it. I did not need to. For weeks, these cost-cutters, as I'd mentally dubbed them, had been strolling the halls, asking surface-level questions and nodding sagely as if they comprehended the responses. "It's a simple matter of overhead," my mother added, her voice low and reedy as she continued to look at the scratch on the table. "Your salary, it's a significant line item, Ethan, a very significant one." Then John leaned forward, putting his elbows on the table, his smile growing into a full grin. "We can get 3 junior engineers for what we pay you, Matt," he continued, his voice oozing with a sense of accomplishment that he'd clearly been waiting years to express. "Nothing personal. It's just cost-cutting. Smart business. Nothing personal." The words hung in the airless room, taking out any remaining oxygen. 15 years at 2 a.m. server reboots, canceled dates, and vacation days spent on the phone fixing a system that only I understood. I'd built them an empire on a rock-solid digital foundation, and they were treating me like a faulty piece of hardware that could be replaced. I did not argue. I did not yell. What was the point? I just stared at my father and then my mother. I caught a tiny glimpse of guilt in my mother's eyes before she wiped it away. My father's expression remained blank. They had already made a decision. I rose up, pushed my chair in quietly, and nodded once. "I understand," I replied, and the untruth tasted like ash in my mouth. As I headed back to my office, which I'd been in for almost a decade, I passed the main server room. The familiar, soothing, blinking green lights of the system I'd devised were visible through the reinforced glass. On one of the displays, a small, simple line of text appeared in the system's back-end diagnostic log. "The data archiving protocol is scheduled to run in 60 days. A routine I'd devised, a routine that required my oversight. They had no idea there was a ticking time bomb." I stepped inside my office and grabbed an empty cardboard box. Packing up 15 years of your life is an unusual task. It doesn't take as long as you'd expect. A few framed images of friends, a coffee cup that read "World's OK Coder," and a stack of technical manuals that I had virtually memorized. The entire time, a reel of memories went in my head, not the nice ones, but the minor ones. The 1,000 minor moments of being taken for granted that I had purposefully disregarded for years. I wasn't only their son, I was essentially their first employee. I remembered the real beginning, working from the wet, musty basement of their first little office building. While they were out hustling, making deals and shaking hands, I was down there, surrounded by cinderblock walls, powered by lukewarm coffee, and an almost naive faith in what we were creating together. I taught myself to code because we couldn't afford to employ a professional, not because I like it at first. I was the one who put together our first server from recycled parts and stretched Ethernet cables across the ceiling using a staple gun. The system grew naturally as the company expanded. One property complex grew to 5, then 20, and finally 50 throughout Ohio, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia. With each purchase, the system I created got more complex and necessary. It was more than just a convenience, it was the company's primary nervous system. It processed rent payments with merciless efficiency. It dispatched maintenance staff using an algorithm I devised to minimize travel time while increasing tenant satisfaction, allowing us to maintain the greatest occupancy rates in the region. It was our single most significant competitive edge, and I was the architect. The difficulty was that I was the only person who genuinely understood it. That was not by choice. It was based on budget. For at least the last 5 years, I'd been almost asking them to invest in establishing a professional technology department. I'd stroll into my father's large office, equipped with detailed plans and charts demonstrating the exponential growth of data and user requests. "Dad, we need to hire at least 2 support techs," I'd say, pointing to a graph that showed our server load approaching critical levels. "And we must start detailing the system architecture. If I get struck by a bus tomorrow, you'll be flying blind." My father would recline back in his beautiful leather chair, which I knew my system had paid for multiple times, and offer me that placating, condescending smile. "Son, the money is tight right now. Every spare dollar has to go into acquiring that new property portfolio in Pittsburgh. Besides," he'd add with a hearty pat on my shoulder, "you handle it all so well on your own. Why pay for more people when we have the best right here?" My mother's approach was different and milder in terms of invalidation. "Oh, Ethan, you always worry so much," she'd say, raising her hand as if to shoo away a fly. "It's all just computers and wires. As long as the rent checks keep coming in, it's working. Don't overcomplicate things." I recall one Thanksgiving clearly. I was due to attend my then-girlfriend's family dinner, which was a significant step for us. My phone blew up at 2 p.m., right as they were bringing the turkey out of the oven. A power surge at one of our primary data centers compromised a critical database. I spent the next 6 hours on the phone and remotely signed in, slowly rebuilding the index from a backup. I saved the company from a possible week-long downtime. When I called my father late that night to tell him the danger had been avoided, he simply responded, "Good job, son. Knew you could handle it." Then she told me about the magnificent turkey John had cut. He never inquired what I'd missed. My girlfriend and I broke up a week later. David, our head of maintenance, appeared to be the only one in the entire organization who understood it. David was a lifer, with calloused hands and motor grease stuck under his fingernails. He'd seen me grow from a tiny child in the basement to the man who oversaw the entire digital show. After another difficult budget meeting, he found me in the server room, staring at the blinking lights. "Don't let him get to you, Matt," he replied with a low groan. "This whole place, this entire 50-complex operation runs on what's inside your head. They haven't got a clue. They think it's the buildings that make the money. It's not. It's this." He tapped the glass of a server rack with his fat finger. "It's you." His remarks provided some consolation, but the irritation grew, especially once John officially joined the team. He had finished with a business degree, and my parents promptly appointed him vice president of operations. He received a corner office, a large expense account, and a complete lack of understanding of how the business actually operated. I recall him coming into my office once, seeing my whiteboards covered in complicated diagrams, and remarking, "So you just make the computers work? Seems pretty straightforward." He saw me as the nerdy elder brother, the man in the back room who served a necessary but costly purpose. He despised my income because he couldn't measure my labor using one of his simple spreadsheets. I was seen as a problem to be solved rather as an asset to be valued. Then came the consultants. They were introduced to us by Mr. Paul, an old family friend who played golf with my father on Saturdays. "James, you have to meet these guys," Paul had remarked at a 4th of July BBQ, his voice booming with fake seriousness. "They're absolute wizards. They'll find efficiencies in your operation you never even knew you had." The wizards from Cost Slashers Incorporated were 2 suave guys dressed in outfits that probably cost more than my first automobile. They spoke solely in buzzwords: synergy, optimization, right-sizing, and value-added attrition. To minimize costs, they created colorful charts and slick PowerPoint slides that express the same thing in 100 different ways. What is the greatest, simplest, and most value-added cost to eliminate? They highlighted with a flourish the highly compensated head of engineering who, in their expert view, could be readily replaced by a team of cheaper, younger, and more flexible people. They shared their findings with my parents in the main conference room. I was invited but not requested to speak. I basically had to sit there and listen as these two charlatans, who most likely couldn't tell the difference between a server and a microwave, described how my 15 years of specialized knowledge was a disadvantage. "You're paying for legacy knowledge," one of them stated calmly, glancing at my father. "In today's fast-moving tech landscape, you want nimble, hungry juniors. You can get 3 of them for this one salary. Think of the immediate ROI." My parents, who were already under financial stress from a disastrous real estate investment that they had carefully kept from me, saw the consultant's idea as a miracle cure. It was not only about my money. It was about finding a simple, validating answer to a complex problem they were too proud to admit they had caused. Firing me was easier than admitting they had gambled and lost millions. Looking back, all of the signs were there. Mr. Paul would ask me extremely specific questions about our system security policies during family gatherings. My parents would awkwardly change the subject anytime I mentioned long-term strategic planning. They were not only being cheap, they were also desperate. What about John? John was merely relieved to be the unquestioned prince, with the court magician out of the way. I secured the cardboard box with a long, noisy length of packing tape. As I brought it out of my office for the final time, I saw David in the hallway. He only gazed at me, his eyes filled with a sad, weary understanding. He shook his head slowly. "They just made the biggest mistake of their lives, son," he said softly. At the time, I assumed he was simply being a loyal buddy. I had no idea how prophetic his words would prove to be. I stepped outside into the brilliant afternoon sun, leaving the blinking green lights and my entire family behind. I felt a deep sense of grief, but something else was bubbling behind it. Cold, unyielding determination. They had made a business decision. Now it was time for me to make mine. That night, after placing the box from my previous life in the corner of my quiet apartment, I unlocked my laptop. An unread email was in my inbox. The subject line was straightforward, direct, and professional. Interview invitation for Chief Systems Architect. The sender was Ridgeview Management, our largest, sharpest, and most successful competitor. The first 2 months after I left Clarke Properties were a bizarre and surreal period of silence. For the first time in 15 years, my phone was not a ticking time bomb of emergency calls, causing constant low-level anxiety. I could eat without thinking about a database mistake. I slept all night every night. I had 3 rounds of rigorous, gratifying interviews with Ridgeview Management. Their CEO, Eleanor Cross, a sharp, no-nonsense woman, didn't only inquire about my qualifications. She interrogated me about my system design philosophy, scalability, and how to develop resilient, future-proof platforms. It was a talk I had wanted to have with my own father for years, one about building rather than just maintaining. Then, exactly 59 days after being fired, David called me. It wasn't on my old work phone, of course, but on my personal cell, which only a few individuals had. "Matt, it's David," he replied, his voice tense with a tightness I recognized all too well. It sounded like something broke. "We've got a problem, a big one." "What's going on, David?" I said, my heart beginning to beat with a familiar, unwanted rhythm. "The system's acting up, badly. Maintenance requests are vanishing into thin air. It's not just a glitch, it's like they were never even filed. John's new hotshot tech kid, Chad, keeps telling everyone it's a minor caching issue." Chad. I knew him from a quick, uncomfortable introduction before I left, young and confident, with a resume full of fashionable buzzwords and a smirk that was a cheap imitation of John. "It's Mrs. Gable in 12B, Matt," David said, his voice lowering. "She's 80 years old. I live alone. Her ceiling is about to collapse from a pipe leak. She's been calling for 3 days. Chad just keeps telling her to submit a ticket online, but the portal is broken. She's been calling my personal cell, crying. I don't know what to do." The picture of this poor elderly woman afraid in her own home chilled my blood. This wasn't about servers or programming anymore. This was about people. It's not a caching issue, is it, David? I asked gently. There was a prolonged pause. No, son, it's not. Feels different. Feels like the whole thing is starting to rot from the inside out. I knew what it was. Tomorrow marked day 60 of the data preservation protocol. I had built a powerful script that would run quarterly, a housekeeping measure for transferring old, inactive records to a deep storage server. This conserved space and kept the active database compact and speedy. However, it was not and never intended to be a fully automated procedure. It took manual supervision to distinguish between truly ancient data, such as a renter who moved out 3 years ago, and recently active data that had not been updated in a few weeks. It was fail-safe, a human check in the system to prevent precisely what was about to occur. Without my supervision, the script would operate blindly. It would flag a 3-month-old leasing agreement as inactive and archive it, rendering it unreachable to the front-end systems. It would look for a recent payment record and proceed in the same manner. It would not simply be a glitch, it would be a systematic and cascading data calamity. I described it to David in the clearest way I could. He uttered a lengthy, passionate curse beneath his breath. "I'll try to tell them," he said. But we both realized it was pointless. John refused to listen to an old maintenance person over his new IT genius. The next day, the storm hit full force. My phone began ringing around 9 a.m. The first call came from John. His voice was filled with displeasure, not alarm. "Hey Matt, that maintenance thing is a little worse than we thought. Chad's having some trouble tracking it down. What's the admin password for the root database?" It was a fundamentally irresponsible query, like requesting the launch codes for a nuclear silo. Giving him the password would be corporate suicide. "I'm no longer an employee, John," I explained gently, my voice steady. "I can't give you that information. It would be a massive security breach." "Don't be like that. We're family. Just help us out." "You define the terms of our relationship, John. It's business. And I'm no longer in business with you," I responded. Then I disconnected. An hour later, my mother called. Her voice was full of strained sweetness. "Ethan, honey, your brother is really struggling. He's so stressed. Can't you just come in for a little while, just to point him in the right direction?" "Mom, I don't work there anymore. It wouldn't be appropriate." "Don't be so difficult, Ethan. This is your family's legacy on the line." "You were the one who said it was just business, Mom," I answered, my tone harsher than intended. "A wise business decision." I stopped the phone before she could respond. By mid-afternoon, true panic had set in. My father called, his voice full of fury and terror. "Ethan, the payment processing system is completely down. It's rejecting all incoming rent payments. It's the first of the month. We have millions of dollars in receivables that have just vanished. Do you know what kind of penalties we face from the banks?" "I have an idea," I explained. "The archiving mechanism presumably marked active tenant payment profiles as inactive and locked them down one by one." "You have to fix this," he exclaimed, his voice breaking with despair. "This is a disaster of your making." "My making?" I said, a frightening calm coming over me. I seem to recall presenting a budget for a support team and a documentation project for 5 years running. Who was it that called that unnecessary overhead? "I'll pay you $200 an hour, whatever you want. Just come down here." This was the moment. The moment I had both dreaded and, in a dark, bitter corner of my heart, expected. My thoughts returned to the cold conference room, John's sneer, my mother's averted gaze, and my father's cold rejection. Years of being devalued. My warnings are being systematically ignored. A lifetime of it. Then my brain did something unexpected. It took me back to a sunny afternoon when I was 10 and John was 6. He had fallen off his bike and scraped his knee, blood mixed with dirt. He was screaming, and I was the one who picked him up, dusted him down, and carried him halfway home on my back. A pain of familial duty and a shadow of brotherly fondness twisted in my stomach. For a short second, I almost gave in. Then my phone vibrated with a new email notice. I took a quick check at my laptop screen. The sender was Victoria Cross. The subject line is, "Formal Offer, Chief Systems Architect, Ridgeview Management." My memory of my crying young brother faded, replaced by a crystal-clear image of John's smug expression in that boardroom. The internal conflict was resolved. My determination solidified into something as strong and impenetrable as forged steel. "Dad," I whispered into the phone, my voice steady and clear like a bell. "You have made a business decision. I've also made one." Before he could react, I hung up. I opened the email from Ridgeview. My income was 30% higher than what my father had been paying me. It featured a large signing bonus and stock options in a growing company. But it was more than just money. That was the title. It was all about respect. It was an opportunity to create something amazing without having to beg for the necessary tools. The phone rang again. It was John, his voice wild and hysterical. "It's $500 per hour, Matt. $500. Simply name your pricing. We will give you a part in the company. Please." I let it go to voicemail. I typed a one-word response to Victoria Cross. "Accepted." Then I shut off the phone. For the first time in my adult life, quiet seemed peaceful. Starting with Ridgeview management felt like walking out of a black and white film and into magnificent Technicolor. The workspaces were sleek and modern, created for cooperation, with floor-to-ceiling windows and a calm, concentrated energy. On my first day, Victoria Cross personally walked me to my new workplace. It was a corner office with a spectacular view of the downtown skyline. "This is your space, Ethan," she stated, her tone straight and respectful. "Your team is made up of 4 senior engineers, all of whom are top tier. The welcome packet includes your first-year budget. We hired you because you're among the best. We trust you to create the industry's most robust, scalable, and secure property management platform. My door is always open. Don't be afraid to ask for what you need. This is what I need." The words were simple, but they seemed revolutionary. For 15 years, my professional existence was defined by what I could not have. Here, I was asked what I needed to be successful. It was confusing in the greatest way. My new crew was fantastic. They were dedicated professionals who were truly eager to collaborate with me. When I presented my early architectural drawings on a huge whiteboard, they saw potential rather than obstacles. They posed sharp, insightful questions. They questioned my assumptions in a good manner. We spent the entire afternoon arguing the benefits of 2 different database technologies. We were collaborating to create something greater together. It was everything I'd ever dreamed in a professional setting. Linda, one of my engineers, discovered a technique to optimize a search query I had created, resulting in a half-second response time. Instead of being defensive, I was excited. "That's brilliant," I assured her. "Implement it." The unexpected appreciation on her face told me everything I needed to know about the society Victoria had established here. Meanwhile, the storm at Clarke Properties intensified into a Category 5 hurricane. David kept me updated via sporadic, inconspicuous text messages and brief broadcasts from a war zone. They attempted to restore from a server backup, one text read. It was 1 week old. They deleted the last 7 days of maintenance logs and payment data. Chad blames a corrupted server problem. John hired 2 additional junior employees from an internet freelance service. Another stated a week later, they are based in 2 distinct nations. It's like seeing 3 kids try to solve a Rubik's Cube by bashing it with a hammer during a terrible video chat. The upheaval was no longer simply internal. The tenants were furious. Negative reviews were appearing on Google and Yelp like toxic mushrooms. Occupancy rates, once my family's proudest metric, were beginning to decline. About a month into my new job, Victoria summoned me to her office. It was the same office where she'd hired me, but the atmosphere was different. I was no longer a candidate. I was a member of her inner circle. "Ethan," she began, motioned for me to sit down. "You've been here for a few weeks. You're learning the lay of the land. I've got a mission for you that demands your unique and intimate insight." She pushed a file across her large desk. "I'd like a comprehensive competition analysis of the top businesses in our region. Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. I'm particularly interested in your expert and unbiased assessment of Clarke Properties. I'm aware of the background, but I would like your expert assessment of their current operational weaknesses from a purely technical aspect." My heart skips a beat. This was not a casual request. This was a strategic move. A corporate chess move. I spent the next week working late into the night, not out of responsibility, but out of a strong sense of professional pride. I was objective. I didn't write anything about family treachery or sad feelings. I prepared a cold, rigorous technical analysis of a corporation in a downward spiral. I described the IT system's bespoke, undocumented, and vulnerable nature. I recognized the sole point of failure, a complete reliance on one person's institutional expertise. I detailed the cascading effects of allowing the data archiving protocol to run unchecked, including catastrophic data loss, major legal and compliance problems, and a full and permanent breakdown in tenant confidence. My assessment was stark. Without a top-to-bottom system rebuild by an expert team, which would take months and cost millions of dollars, the company's essential operating integrity was irreparably damaged. I did not have to guess. I knew. I had built the house, so I knew where all of the load-bearing walls were, and I knew they were going to collapse. I turned in the 20-page report to Victoria. She read it in utter stillness, with an unreadable look. When she finished, she carefully set it on her desk and glanced up at me. "This is devastatingly thorough," she continued with a gleam in her eyes that I couldn't quite understand. "Thank you, Ethan. This is exactly what I needed." A few days later, I received a final SMS from David. It was an image of a letter written on thick letterhead from Vanguard Holdings, our former largest client. The text below was brief and to the point. "It's official. Vanguard recently ended their contract. That is 20% of our most profitable complex is gone. This is a fatal blow, Matt. The corporation is in a downward spiral with no escape hatches." I gazed at the image, then out the window of my new workplace to the bustling metropolis below. I didn't feel joyful. I didn't feel sorry. I felt a strong sense of inevitability, as if I were witnessing the application of a physical rule. Actions have consequences. It wasn't personal anymore. It was only business. My old family firm was crumbling, as I had prophesied for years. David's call about Vanguard Holdings ending their contract was the final tremor before the earthquake. I understood what the loss of their greatest client meant. It wasn't just a financial setback. It was a public vote of no faith that reverberated across the area real estate industry. Clarke Properties was no longer struggling. It was plainly sinking, and sharks began to circle. I spent the rest of the day in a strange, focused detachment. I led a design meeting with my Ridgeview team, sketching out the architecture for our new cutting-edge tenant portal. We were creating something clean, modern, documented, and robust. We were constructing something the correct manner. My present and history contrasted sharply. That evening, as I drove into my driveway, my headlights shone through the twilight and settled on a familiar figure slumped on my front steps. It was John. He resembled a ghost of his old self. His usually impeccable hair was a mess. His fine suit was rumpled and damaged, and the typical sneer on his face had vanished, replaced by a raw, hollow-eyed desperation that was terrible to see. I shut off the engine and got out of my car, my keys jingling in the unexpected silence. I stepped carefully towards him. He stood up as I approached, his hands deep in his pockets and his shoulders bowed in defeat. "Matt," he replied, his voice scratchy and broken. We need to talk." "There's nothing to talk about, John," I said flatly, devoid of feeling. I kept my hand on the car door. "Please," he implored, and the words he said sounded like they were coming from a dog. "Just hear me out. Vanguard is gone. The bank is calling our loans. We're going to lose everything. The company is going to go under." "I see," I replied. "No, you don't see," he shot back, a flash of his old arrogance returning before being quickly smothered by a surge of misery. "It's a complete disaster. The system, it's a black box. Chad and his guys quit this morning. They took their final paychecks and just walked out. They said the whole system was unethically complex and unsalvageable. They said only a ghost could have built it. I'm not a ghost, John. I'm the guy you told me to pack his things because I was too expensive." The words lingered in the chilly night air between us. He flinched, as if I had physically hit him. For the first time in my life, I noticed genuine humiliation in my brother's eyes. I know, okay? I know. I was an idiot. I was always jealous of you. I hated that Dad relied on you for the important stuff. I was a stupid, arrogant fool. Dad and Mom, they were stupid too. We were all stupid. But this is our family's legacy, Matt. Dad built this company from nothing. No, John, I replied, my voice dangerously soft, cutting through his rant. Dad signed the papers. I built the engine that made it run for 15 years. And you all decided to throw the mechanic out and let the chauffeur try to fix it. How did that work out for you? He had no response to that. He only stared at me, his face pale and weary against the yellow glare of the porch light. The insurance company is threatening to drop us because our maintenance records are missing, he murmured, the words rushing out. The bank is threatening to freeze our assets. It's not just one thing, Matt, it's everything. It's all falling apart at once. He took a step forward. Just help us, he begged, his voice breaking. I am begging you. Name your price, any price. $1 million, a stake in the company, whatever you want. Just come back and fix it. Please. You're the only one in the world who can. I stared at my brother, the golden child who had everything delivered to him on a silver platter, who had now fallen so low that he was standing on my doorway, crying for help. A small, fatigued 10-year-old part of me felt pity. However, it was buried under 15 years of being considered as a utility. It was overshadowed by the remembrance of that smug smirk in the cold conference room. I took a big breath, and the air in my lungs felt clean and fresh. You said you could run the company without me, John. You said it was just business. Well, this is the result of your business decision. Finally, I went to my front door and unlocked it. Now you have to live with it. I went inside and shut the sturdy oak door, the click of the latch reflecting the gravity of my remarks. I did not watch him leave. I walked into my kitchen, leaned against the counter, my heart beating and my hands shaking slightly. It was over. That was the last word, or so I thought. The next morning, I was in a strategy meeting at Ridgeview when my phone, which was on the table, vibrated. David sent a text. My hands were still a little shaky when I lifted it up. It was not a message. It was a photograph. A photograph of a fresh white large envelope on the reception desk at Clarke Properties. The return address was from a famous downtown legal firm that I knew for handling significant business deals. But it was the name placed quietly behind the legal firm's logo that caused the air to pour out of my lungs. Ridgeview Management. I own my own corporation. I mumbled an apology and excused myself from the meeting, my mind running at 1,000,000 miles per minute. I proceeded to the end of the hall, to the window that overlooked the city, and called David. He picked up on the first ring. What is that, David? I questioned, my voice scarcely audible. A courier just dropped it off, he explained, his voice full of astonishment and disbelief. It's addressed to your father, your mother, and John. I saw the letterhead, Matt. What did you do? I didn't do anything, I admitted. And that was the truth. I had no idea what was coming. I hung up and walked, almost in a daze, straight to Victoria Cross's office. Her door was open. She noticed my expression and welcomed me in with a small nod. You've heard, and I take it, she remarked quietly, her fingers curled on her desk. Heard what, Victoria? What's going on? That letter. She gave a faint, contented smile that did not quite reach her eyes. It was the smirk of a grandmaster who had just gotten her opponent into checkmate. Your competitive analysis was very persuasive, Ethan. Pointed out a unique and time-sensitive opportunity. A company with a valuable portfolio of properties, crippled by a catastrophic but eminently fixable operational failure. In the world of mergers and acquisitions, that's what we call a perfect target. She leaned forwards. The board approved the move last night. We made a formal, non-negotiable offer this morning. A low one, I might add, given their current state of extreme distress. They'll have no choice but to accept. It's either this or Chapter 7 bankruptcy. It took me a moment to comprehend the vast, breathtaking scope of what she was saying. Ridgeview was purchasing Clarke Properties. My new employer was purchasing my previous one. And there's one more thing, she said, grabbing a folder from her desk. It was a copy of the official offer letter. A key non-negotiable condition of this acquisition. She turned the sheet around and pointed to a specific clause, Section 4, subsection B. My eyes landed on my name. As a condition of this transaction, Mr. Ethan Clarke, Ridgeview Management's Chief Systems Architect, will be appointed to manage the comprehensive technical audit and subsequent system integration of all Clarke Properties assets. I looked at the words and then back at Victoria. The universe tilted on its axis before snapping back into bright, vivid focus. I wasn't the only guy who declined to help. I wasn't the only person who had been vindicated. I was now in charge. My family's urgent calls had finally halted, because they would now have to make an appointment to speak with me. The acquisition announcement detonated within Clarke Properties' hollowed-out shell. David subsequently informed me that when my father opened the lawyer's letter, he read it 3 times, his face turning a gray color David had never seen before. My mother merely sat on the nearest chair, her hands quivering, and gazed into the middle distance. What about John? John just stood there, stunned at the truth of the situation, until it all came crashing down on him like a physical blow. Their business, their family legacy, was being sold for pennies on the dollar to their main competitor, and I was the face and motor behind that takeover. A week later, I walked back through the Clarke Properties building's glass doors for the first time since being abruptly sacked. But I was not coming in as an embarrassed son. I walked in as a senior executive from the new parent firm, accompanied by 2 members of Ridgeview's quick, efficient transition team. As we walked in, the few remaining employees looked up from their desks, their eyes wide with a powerful combination of terror and interest. My parents and John stood in the doorway of my father's old office, waiting for me. They appeared smaller, diminished by the weight of their failure. "Ethan," my father began, his tone strained and hesitant. "Mr. Clarke," I corrected him, my tone polite but strong, establishing an immediate and insurmountable difference. "Perhaps we should all convene in the conference room to discuss the transition plan." The shift in address of the chilly professional title struck them harder than any angry words could. It drew a line in the sand as sharp as a razor. On this day, in this building, I was neither their son nor their brother. I represented their new reality. We sat in the same conference room where I had been abruptly fired. The irony was so heavy that I practically tasted it. This time, I sat at the head of the table, like my father had always done. I presented the transition strategy with calm, professional accuracy, my voice never faltering. I discussed asset evaluation, operational audits, and personnel reviews. I did not gloat. I did not raise my voice. I didn't even make eye contact for any longer than was professionally required. My cool, detached professionalism served as both my armor and weapon. They understood the lingo, the language of business, and it was now being utilized to clearly inform them that they had lost complete control. "The first order of business," I said as I glanced at a wallboard that was barely above his head, "is a complete top-to-bottom overhaul of the IT infrastructure. My team will begin a full diagnostic tomorrow morning. John, you'll need to provide them with all existing administrative credentials and any and all documentation." "There is no documentation," John said, his gaze locked on the tabletop. "I'm aware," I responded, my voice as flat as a dial tone. "Then you'll just provide the credentials. My team will create the documentation. We do things correctly at Ridgeview." After the meeting, as I was packing my leather briefcase, my mother approached me, her eyes filled with unshed tears. "Ethan, can we please just talk for 5 minutes as a family?" A part of me felt a twinge of old guilt, but I knew that giving in even slightly would erode the wall I had fought so hard to create. I needed to see this through. "Mom," I began, my voice softening slightly, a deliberate amount of grace. "Right now my absolute priority is to stabilize this company, to protect Ridgeview's investment. Any conversations about non-business matters are best saved for another time and another place." I then turned to her, my voice becoming more official. "We can schedule a follow-up through my assistant if you have any further operational questions." She recoiled, like if I had slapped her. The boundary was established. It was absolute. She understood. The weeks that followed were a bizarre exercise in undoing my own life's work. My intelligent and efficient Ridgeview staff marveled at the complexity and inventiveness of what I'd constructed entirely on my own, and they shook their heads in bewilderment at the complete lack of support and documentation. It's like one guy built an entire skyscraper, a couple of them told me, and then they fired him and were surprised when the elevator stopped working. One of the most strange moments occurred when I required that all surviving Clarke workers, including my brother, complete a multi-day training course on the new Ridgeview IT processes and ethics policies. Obviously, I did not conduct the training myself. I delegated it to a bright, capable junior engineer on my team, a lady named Maya, who was half John's age and twice as competent. I strolled past the training room at one time and looked through the glass barrier. I noticed John seated at a computer terminal, his shoulders depressed as Maya carefully explained the new help desk ticketing system. He looked up, and our gazes connected for a brief moment through the glass. I witnessed disgrace. I witnessed resentment. And for the first time in my life, I noticed a flicker of what appeared to be genuine, unadulterated respect. I gave him a small, almost unnoticeable nod and continued going. The message was clear. This is how a professional organization functions. This is what you threw out. 6 months have gone. Clarke Properties' integration into the Ridgeview portfolio was not just successful, it also served as a case study for the organization. Under my guidance, we did more than merely restore the old, dysfunctional system. We tore it down to the studs and started from scratch. It was a work of art, secure, scalable, cloud-based, and so thoroughly documented that any qualified developer could walk in and understand it. Tenant satisfaction, which had touched rock bottom, skyrocketed. Ridgeview's most successful assets were the properties that had previously been losing money. My reputation within the organization was reinforced. I wasn't simply the person who had survived a horrific family betrayal. I was the guy who could transform a sinking ship into a flagship. However, my relationship with my family remained professional and distant. I saw them during quarterly review meetings. I sent courteous work-related emails. The personal link, which I had previously treasured above all else, felt severed, possibly permanently. Then, unexpectedly, my father contacted my personal mobile phone and invited me to join him for supper, just the two of us. I hesitated. My initial inclination was to say no in order to maintain the gap. But something in his voice, a deep weariness I'd never heard before, compelled me to acquiesce. We met in a quiet, old-school steakhouse, a neutral setting filled with the faint hum of other people's discussions. For a long time, we ate in awkward quiet. Finally, he set down his fork and knife, properly placed on his plate. He glanced at me with tired, hooded eyes. "I was wrong, Ethan," he continued, his words coming out slow and heavy, as if each one was a horrible burden he had to bear. "Your mother and I were wrong. Terribly, fundamentally wrong." I did not say anything. I simply listened, my expression neutral. I was not going to make things easy for him. "It wasn't just the money," he said, lowering his gaze to the white tablecloth. "It was pride. My pride. We made a bad investment, a speculative land deal down in Florida. It went south. We were deeper than we ever let on to anyone, especially you. We were facing the possibility of Chapter 11 bankruptcy." He drew a nervous breath and sipped some water. "And then Paul, our friend, your godfather, he was in my ear constantly. He kept telling me how bloated our operational costs were, how we were living in the past. He was the one who introduced us to those consultants. He pushed it, Matt. He said it was the only smart move, the only way to free up capital and save ourselves. He made it sound so simple, so logical, a lifeline." He looked up, and for the first time I saw a broken man rather than a failing businessman. We were scared. And we were ashamed. It was easier to believe a stranger in a suit who told us what we wanted to hear than to admit to our own son that we had failed. That we had put the family's legacy at risk. He stopped, his voice cracking. He played on my deepest fear, that I wouldn't have anything to leave for John. "James," he would ask, "what will John inherit if this all goes wrong? You are doing this for him." He stared me in the eyes. "We sacrificed you to save our own pride." This was the missing piece to the puzzle. The one who gave the entire horrible scene a terrible kind of meaning. It didn't excuse what they did, far from it, but it did reframe the situation. They weren't simply cruel. They were desperate, weak, and had been expertly managed. "Paul?" I inquired quietly. "Why would he do that to you? He was your best friend." My father gave a sour, humorless laugh that ended with a cough. "Best friend? Yeah. We found out a month after the Ridgeview acquisition was announced. His lawyer accidentally sent an email to our old accountant. Paul had a shell company set up, ready to make a lowball offer. He was planning to buy us out for 10 cents on the dollar the moment the bank called our loans. He wasn't trying to help us save the company. He was trying to push it off a cliff so he could pick through the wreckage." He shook his head slowly, the weight of the two betrayals weighing on him. "We were so busy betraying you. We never saw the real snake in the grass." We sat silently for another long minute. He'd confessed. He had exposed the family's guilt on the table between us. It was not an apology asking for forgiveness. Rather, it was a statement of truth. A final and heartbreaking account of the truth. "Thank you for telling me," I finally said. That was all I could provide. It was not forgiveness. It was not an absolution. But it was an acknowledgement. It was a weak and tentative start. The next day, while I was finishing up at work, I received an email. It originated from John's personal account. There was no subject line. I clicked it open, partly anticipating another desperate appeal or a harsh allegation. The email's body comprised merely 3 words. "You were correct." It was not an apology. It was a concession, a surrender, a complete and total acknowledgement of a truth he had spent his entire life rejecting. I stared at the 3 words on the screen for a long time. Then, with a discreet click, I dragged my pointer to an icon that resembled a miniature trash can. I erased the email. I didn't need his concession anymore. My vindication did not stem from his words, my father's confession, the money, or the corner office. It came from work. It always has. Today, I'm sitting in my old office. Naturally, it has undergone renovations. The walls are a pleasant, soothing gray. The furnishings are modern and simple. The old, wheezing server that used to hum in the closet has been replaced with a silent, powerful blade server linked to the Ridgeview cloud. This is my office, yet it is also not. It symbolizes how much has changed, both for the company and for me. From my view, I can watch the city spread out into a lively panorama of possibilities. I'm no longer the guy in the back room who keeps the lights on. I work as a future architect for a company that prioritizes long-term savings over short-term gains. This invests on resilience rather than cutting shortcuts. My family, our relationship is rebuilding. It's a tedious, careful procedure, similar to gluing together a cracked vase. It'll never be the same as before, and perhaps that's okay. It'll be something new, something more honest. There are awkward holiday dinners, complete with extended silences and whispered facts. My father is now quieter and more thoughtful. My mother tries too hard to be kind, and her gestures are filled with sadness that she can't fully express. John works in a junior project management position at another company in another state. I hear he's doing well. He's learning from the ground up as I did. Maybe someday we'll be brothers again. Perhaps not. When I reflect on what transpired, I do not feel triumphant. The anger and bitterness have mostly evaporated, replaced by something quieter. What I feel is tremendous and unwavering clarity. My family made a horrible mistake. They assumed my worth was a number that could be decreased on a spreadsheet. They believed they could replace 15 years of effort, expertise, and institutional knowledge with something cheaper and easier. They dismissed their son. However, they were unable to fire the repercussions. They discovered the hard way that the most expensive asset a corporation can lose is not money. It is irreplaceable knowledge. It's about trust. Finally, this was never intended to be a revenge story. The story was about respect. Respect for the work. Respect for experience. Finally, respect yourself, especially when those who are meant to love you the most fail to do so. You must be the one to determine your own worth, create your own worth, and to stand by it, even if it means standing alone. You must be willing to design your own future, brick by brick, line by line of code, because only a foundation based on actual unmistakable value can ever be shaken.